So, kicking it off then, opens on the first page with Bruce Wayne in a very near-deadly car crash, and you've got his internal monologue saying that he's racing towards essentially the sun. He's a bit of an Icarus figure. It's quite an interesting bookending device, because obviously it opens, and there's going to be spoilers throughout this, by the way, so if you need to pause it and go and read it first, go do it. It opens with him nearly in a fiery car crash, and then it ends with him in a sort of suicidal, near-fatal fight with the epitome of the sun throughout the entire book, which is Superman.
Yes, there is a nice cyclical nature to that aspect of the narrative. He's almost suicidal near the beginning because in context of the narrative, as happened in the 1980s, although I think this predates Death in the Family.
By 2 years.
This predates Death in the Family, but the impetus for Bruce Wayne deciding to quit being Batman is that Jason Todd dies. So Frank Miller predicted that 2 years in advance.
Not at the hands of the Joker, though. There's no reason necessarily given.
There's no context. Jason just died. Batman failed in some way. And as a result of the fact he'd been doing it for 20 years or so at that point, if not a bit longer, and he was obviously tired, feeling old and worn out, it seems to have broken him at that time. But 10 years in stasis, going back to something that he never really was in the first place, that of the Bruce Wayne Playboy persona, seems to have really stunted him, and he is a thrill seeker. He's somebody who seeks adventure. The fact that he's not had any of that, he's not got a woman, he doesn't have children, other than, you could say, his adopted children, which at this point
abandoned him.
Only includes Dick, who, is only ever mentioned, and you never actually see him.
You do in Dark Knight Strikes Again, and I won't spoil why, but it's horrendous.
Oh, it's going to be terrible. I've seen artwork from Dark Knight Strikes Again, and I just wonder what happened to Frank Miller's art style.
They used entirely digital colouring. That's why. Whereas this is Lynn Volley and Klaus Janson.
Well, was Klaus Janson involved in Strikes Again?
No, it was just Varley. Their marriage was on the rocks at the time, and
they're married.
They were.
Okay. Yeah. And then he wrote Strikes Again.
Yeah, then he saw colouring. Also, it suffered from heavy delays due to 9/11 actually happening. And that's really interesting because in this book, in the second page, he opens with Gotham's Twin Towers, something very prescient for him because he wrote this book because he was mugged in New York and saw the pre-Giuliani New York crime wave and thought, this is what it's going to take to do something about it. And then later on, Two-Face attempts to attack the Twin Towers, very much in line with his 2 moniker. And then a jet comes very close to crashing into them. There's a panel much later in the comic when the nuclear bomb goes off and it causes an EMP effect. And so it's strange that Miller's Dark Knight has a really sort of close tie with that monumental event that looms large over New Yorkers' minds.
The nuke going off doesn't just lead to a jet almost hitting. It leads to a 747 crashing into a skyscraper.
That's what I was thinking of.
So it is quite prescient, although I would say that's just a symptom of everybody who lives in New York. You've kind of got to recognize that you've got these gigantic buildings, these gigantic glass buildings. You might as well paint a massive target on any of them for not just terrorist attacks, but for just accidents, sadly. Obviously, not saying that that's a good thing. I'm just saying that's the reality of it.
So speaking of degenerative cities, then you get the shot after Bruce has a meeting with Commissioner Gordon. He's sort of stumbling through. You get this Rorschach-like character holding the sign, "We are damned," rather than "The end is nigh," which is quite interesting. And then Bruce has some musings, and he's nearly mugged by the mutants. And shall we talk about that particular street gang?
I do just want to mention, early on especially, it does a fantastic job of setting up the tone, because there's a lot of pathetic fallacy used. Pathetic fallacy, for those uninitiated, is that when you use the weather in a story to symbolically match the tone or the mood of the character. And early on, it's always raining, but it's also the city's going through a heat wave. And it's only when Batman re-emerges, when Bruce decides to pick the mantle back up, that a cold streak comes back into the city. So it's almost like the city is descending into hell. And then as soon as Batman returns, he slowly begins to drag the city out of the mire it's found itself in.
Well, it's interesting as well. That's the same thing carried over to the first cover of the Dark Knight Returns, which is actually the first issue title. It wasn't the actual issue name for the collected edition. It was originally just Batman: The Dark Knight, but you have that lightning striking, hence why Strikes Again is titled as it is, and you've got that iconic image of Batman silhouetted behind the striking.
Oh
lightning.
yeah, I've got it right here,
Yeah.
so we'll probably flash it up on the screen digitally as well, but you can see it right there. I think it's an excellent cover, very iconic looking.
Well, it also speaks to the comic's form because it is itself onomatopoeic. Like, you know exactly the sounds being made by that simple image. And it was obviously parodied in homaged in Batman v Superman by Zack Snyder. It's one of the seminal images of Batman.
BVS takes so much from this.
And does it so well as well.
That's the thing. I would actually say, with regards to the actual Superman versus Batman bit, BVS improves on this to such a ridiculously significant degree.
Yes.
Because Superman is completely character assassinated in this, and I would say that this comic alone is the reason for so many people's negative view of Superman.
I would agree.
The caricature that most people bring up of Superman as a Boy Scout, as somebody who just does what the authorities tell him, as somebody who is boring because he's too powerful, all comes from here, sadly, because Frank Miller, while understanding Batman,
doesn't get Superman.
Yeah, he does not understand the appeal.
And he has a form of edgy Arrested Development in... He gave a recent Comic-Con interview in the last how many years of where he said, why did I pit Batman and Superman against each other? Well, I thought, who would Batman hate the most? Not just the guy who's bulletproof and the guy who has his life together, but the guy who could fly when I needed a goddamn car. And it's like, that just makes Batman sound so petty. Whereas Batman in the context of the Justice League, he is crucial to their entire operations. He builds all their tech to the point of where he could take them down in Tower of Babel. And when his plans get leaked, it's catastrophic.
It absolutely is. I think as well, it's just the fundamental... I'm shocked that Frank Miller would say something like that, because that makes... Like you say, that's not just a misunderstanding of Superman, that's a misunderstanding of Batman. Batman is not somebody who's going to feel such petty jealousy over a difference in pure power levels. He's somebody who's going to recognize that Superman is somebody who represents justice, who represents individual virtue, who represents all of the things that Batman himself strives for. So I see no reason other than to contrive a reason. I think Frank Miller, I feel, is being somewhat conceited in his reasoning there. Because I think we all know the real reason that Frank Miller has Batman and Superman square off at the end of this comic.
Because it's cool.
Because it's cool.
Yeah.
Because it's cool, and he wanted to settle the age-old nerd argument of who would win Batman v Superman, where people go, oh, Batman can beat anybody if he's got enough prep time.
Which is true.
It is probably true, but also Frank Miller decided, well, I'm going to confirm it. It's canon now. There you go. But anyway, back to the original question you asked, which was about the mutants.
Yeah, how do you feel?
I think the mutants, as a collective group and individually, are annoying.
Yep.
Their mode of speech is very annoying.
Distracting.
However, I do think they are better as a symbol of the disease that has infected Gotham, of the cultural and social malaise that most people feel, because Bruce, when he's confronted by them in this scene we're referencing early on, says that he goes back and thinks to himself of how his mother and father were murdered, which, once again, back to BVS, Snyder took basically panel by panel and recreated it, which is pretty cool from this comic book. But he thinks to himself, the man who did that was scared, he was frightened, he was hungry, so while I'm not going to forgive him for what he did, I can at least recognize that he was a different breed to the criminals that we've got now, because the criminals that he's facing in the mutants are just bored kids. Yeah. They're bored kids who want to do it, who want to hurt people, murder people in the most repugnant and torturous ways possible for fun, for kicks, because they've got nothing better to do. The world around them is no hope, and the only thing that they've got to keep them going is the next sick thrill that they can get.
Yeah, it's very much like in the inverse, where I know we don't like him for his politics again, but Mark Waid and Alex Ross in Kingdom Come, where they satirized the Rob Liefeld-style Image Comics heroes, and in the same way, the heroes get reckless and violent and ridiculous in their costumes because they're also doing it for kicks, because there's such an abundance of heroism and such a deficit of villainy that they're getting careless and selfish. So Superman has to remind them by being a returning example of how to be a hero properly.
That would be a good one to do as well, because, like you say, it's kind of an inverse. Kingdom Come is basically Superman Returns, in a sense, and it's much better at depicting Superman as the iconic symbol of hope.
And it's much more beautiful as well. I'm going to say something verbatim here, but Frank Miller's panel composition is fantastic. His art is ugly. I don't like the art in Dark Knight Returns, and I never have.
That's fair. I disagree, because I do like most of the art, but his artwork can be very sketchy and can be very ugly. I would stand by my opinion that Frank Miller's best work is in Sin City, because when he's working purely with expressionistic shadows and use of negative space to convey a mood, that's where his artwork shines and can really show the emotion and the mood that he's trying to convey. Whereas in this, it can look very messy, it can look very muddy. There's one panel in particular, it's only a small one, but I think it's where the mayor and his assistant are in a sauna together, and there's no colour in the panel, it's just a little black and white image of the two of them. I assume it's supposed to be replicating the steam that would be in the room, and it looks like not even a first draft sketch. It looks like something that he just scribbled onto a handkerchief and then just, I don't know, cut it out and glued it onto the panel.
Looks like something you do at the Comic-Con signing booth.
But then, at other times, there is some brilliant artwork in here.
I agree. The full-page splashes are pretty great. The one where you particularly said he's perching on the...
I think they can.
Second issue.
I think they can vary in quality, but the second issue, when he's in the bat tank and gets out of the bat tank so that he can confront the mutant leader, is where you really see that Neil Adams influence shine, because it is something that the inking from Jansen is lovely with very thick lines, and I think Frank Miller's artwork always shines the best when you've got an inker who puts thick lines around the images, because they do look very sketchy otherwise. So having those nice thick lines makes the characters look a bit bolder, makes them look a bit stronger, and that is one of the images, let me see if I can find it here, where Frank Miller's, the virtues of his artwork really do get to shine. Here it is, right here. So once again, we'll probably flash this up on screen, but this image right here, he does look fantastic, but I can definitely understand why other times it does look a bit rubbish, and Dark Knight Strikes Again is the nadir of that.
It's horrific.
Although I will say, I said I didn't read them. I did read a bit of Dark Knight 3 Master Race when it was coming out, because I've got, I think, the first 7 single issues, and the artwork from that is Andy Kubert, who's Miller-esque, but much more consistent, and did some great work on Grant Morrison's early Batman run. And then you get the little insert comics where Frank Miller drew them himself, and they look abysmal.
It does look a crayon drawing. Yeah. So the last thing to say on the mutants, do you think they're racist? Because Christopher Sharratt did an interview with Frank Miller titled Twilight of the Idols, very Nietzschean, even though I wouldn't say that Batman's a Dionysian character, even he has been called that. I remember reading that before. Miller resents the accusations leveled at him that the mutants engaged in racial stereotyping despite being an all-white gang. Because
that's what I was about to say. What?
Because the Village Voice believed their strange dialect imitated urban African-American slang. So
I
Miller
mean, that's
actually,
on you, bro.
Exactly, yeah. You have the bigotry, soft bigotry of low expectations. Miller said the reaction to Dark Knight was actually based on the fact that Dark Knight did not offer a didactic left-wing perspective, because, quote, Miller could not have done Batman and been politically correct at the same time, because the politically correct contingent won't allow for any character that with a larger-than-life status. Also, of course, violence is out, and Batman is an extremely violent character.
Yes, as he should be, because sometimes, if you want to enforce law and order, you need to beat fear into the criminals.
And also, I suppose we come on to the... we'll come on to it later, an explicit example, though Miller quite hides it quite quietly. Batman kills in this, as he does in BVS.
Well, Batman kills in a lot of things, and I think this...
I'm tired of pretending it's not.
Yeah, this cultural... I don't know, lie?
Supposition.
Yeah, there's this... I just call it this pop cultural lie that a lot of people have told themselves, that Batman, his code is unbreakable, he never kills. I'm sorry, he may have a code where he doesn't want to kill most of the time, but he has broken it countless
Yeah,
times.
but if
He's
a
even
vampire gets in the way of a steak, or a clown gets in the way of Michael Keaton's Batman's flamethrower,
or
and
if
Batman Returns,
Darkseid is about to end the universe,
Yep.
maybe he can make a few exceptions.
Yeah. So I think, again, Frank Miller nails that, and the sort of lay press and leftists.
I will also say that I think the almost cynical thrill seeker Batman in this, who's been so long away from his earlier adventures when everything was a bit more innocent. It's we've always been criminals. Like, how many people do we know who are good, who are still alive? How many of them stayed good? That sort of attitude makes me think, well, yeah, why wouldn't Batman go, well, I kept letting them live, and then they just kept murdering more people?
Yeah.
So maybe I was taking the wrong approach to this. I can understand why people excuse the whole aspect of the code being that Batman doesn't want to push himself over the edge. He doesn't want to turn himself into the kind of monster that he's fighting against. But I would say Batman generally is morally virtuous enough that I would trust him.
Yeah, he has very prudent judgment, yes.
Yeah.
Though some of the prudent judgment isn't exercised in this, because he does kill some criminals later on, but didn't in his early career before he retired. And so we come on to seeing at the same time as Batman is having his chrysalis moment, re-emerging from his cocoon of retirement, we see the Joker has gone basically catatonic because Batman's absence, and you see something very similar in Going Sane by J.M. DeMatteis, which was actually the original script for Craven's Last Hunt, funnily enough.
Yeah, you've mentioned this very strange crossover there.
Yeah, we might have to do that at some point in our little Joker series. And also you see Two-Face, who, and Batman Hush took this plot point eventually as well, has had reconstructive surgery and had his face repaired, but voluntarily chooses, upon release, to become a terrorist again.
Yeah, I would say Two-Face is the best villain in this comic, and in fact I would say the quality of the villains diminishes with every issue. Two-Face is better than the Mutants, who are better than this depiction of Joker, who is just, sadly, I think this is a really boring Joker in this. And then all of them are far better than what he does to Superman. But I think that Two-Face is the best villain because he exemplifies the mistakes that Batman has made throughout his career. Not only did, as we mentioned, he continually let these people live when they'd already gone far beyond the pale of what I would consider forgiveness, being worthy of forgiveness. Not only that, but while he was in his 10-year hiatus, it's stated that Bruce Wayne has been funding the treatments to try and fix Harvey. So in a sense, Bruce has been trying to turn Harvey into a redemption for himself, to kind of justify this idea to him that, okay, if I take this new approach to fighting crime, if I take the rehabilitative approach, as we see with many left-wing attorneys and such nowadays, if we do this, if I focus on the idea he's a victim of society, we can fix him from that. That will justify me having been absent from the city for so long, and therefore I will prove that I made the right decision. Wrong. He failed. Some people, sadly, are completely beyond redemption, and this comic is very good at recognizing that. And the fact that he is beyond redemption immediately goes back to being a terrorist, immediately tries to blow up 2 buildings with thousands of people residing within them, proves to Bruce both that his decision to come back was the right one, and also that his path to redemption is actually very different from what he hoped it had been.
Well, Miller basically steelmans the left-wing argument against Batman. How many times have we heard, actually Batman's really selfish because if he was just Bruce Wayne all the time and gave all his money to charitable causes, the whole of Gotham would be fixed? Unfortunately, see mine and Nick Dixon's book club on Dostoevsky's Notes for Underground for this, but the Dostoevsky quote of, if man were given nothing but a crystal palace in which to lay, to eat cakes, sleep, and busy himself with the continuation of the species, one would get a hammer and smash it all up and reject the cates and eat spiteful rubbish just so something interesting would happen. There is something dark within the nature of men, the line between good and evil that runs down each and every heart, as Solzhenitsyn says. And in terms of this line, Harvey Dent being split directly in two, well, he certainly chooses the evil half even when he isn't disfigured in that way.
Even when his outward appearance doesn't show it. And there's a very effective moment at the end of that of the first issue where he's saying, look at me, what's I'm no different, and Batman flashes between seeing him as he is right now, completely disfigured, and what he says to be his true face underneath, where he's now, instead of just being Two-Face, you see him, he's all corrupt.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.